Greetings, colleagues. Getting ready for a job interview in English? What is the best way to prepare? What questions should you be ready to answer? What's the best way to get ready? Let's discuss some successful strategies and tips to help you at the interview. Greetings, colleagues. I'm Timothy Barrett, and this is the 4 Business English Rundown, the show for professionals from all over the world who want to improve their communication skills in English. So today we're going to talk about job interviews, especially job interviews in English. So this is something I've had a lot of experience, of course, interviewing as an applicant, but also I've administered probably more than 100 interviews where I was on the interviewer side interviewing prospective applicants. And while a professor at the university, it was something I regularly helped students and graduates with preparing for interviews, especially for interviews that are in English. But a lot of the strategies and tips are going to work no matter what language the interview is in anyway. But of course, if your interview is in English and you're not a native English speaker, you definitely want to be ready for prospective questions, questions that you can predict might be asked. You don't want to necessarily hear them for the very first time at the interview. So the more questions you can be exposed to, then the easier it will be once you get to the interview. You don't want to be surprised by anything at the interview. I do have a lot of tips and strategies before the interview, but I'm going to kind of skip over that today. We're just going to focus at the interview. If you do like this video and want to know more strategies and tips, then let me know, and maybe I'll make a follow-up video to add a little bit more background to it. The first thing I want to suggest is be respectful of everyone that you meet on site. As soon as you arrive at the building, the interview has started. It doesn't matter if this is a massive building or a huge complex. Maybe there's several buildings, in this compound, depending on where you're interviewing. It might take 5 or 10 minutes or 30 minutes to get to the actual interview room. But as soon as you enter that building, or even you're getting close to that building, consider the interview has begun. You don't know who is watching you. It could be intentionally, they want to see how you interact with other people, or it could be accidentally. Maybe the interviewer is running late, so as you're going up to the office, so is he or so is she. You never know who you're going to meet. And you never know who will give you a recommendation or a negative recommendation. So you always want to be respectful of anyone that you meet. And this is good advice in life in general, or when you start working there, I would suggest the same thing. But you always want to be respectful of people that you meet on your way to the interview. And how you treat people can definitely come back to help you or to hurt you. And that is my own experience as well. Luckily, I treated people well. And so for one interview that I did, I found out later that the people that I met while waiting for the interview gave me a positive recommendation. Now, I don't know if I would have gotten the job, even if they didn't recommend me. But I'm pretty sure if they recommended against me, if they had said, no, we don't want to work with that guy, I'm 100% sure I would not have gotten the job. So you never know who you're going to meet, who you're going to interact with. Treat them all with respect. And also consider that small talk before the interview or after the interview is part of the interview. It could be small talk with the secretarial staff, the administrative staff. Maybe when you enter the interview room, 1 or 2 of the interviewers are there, but you're waiting for another interviewer. So they're just kind of talking small talk with you while you're waiting. That's part of the interview. If they get the feeling that you're not a nice person or you're not someone that they want to work with, or, you can't really talk about anything, then they're definitely going to keep that in mind when they decide to hire you or hire somebody else. Besides the specific qualifications, most employers want to find someone that they're going to enjoy working with, especially if it's someone from that team, from that department, or that supervisor. They're thinking, gee, what's it going to be like working with this person? Is this someone I'm going to enjoy working with? Can I have a good conversation with them? Or I don't know if I can get along with this person, and they prefer to find somebody else. So always consider the small talk part of the interview. also recommend to smile. Now, don't smile like you're a clown or a fool. I would recommend to have a nice, subtle smile on your face throughout the interview. Now, obviously, it depends on what you're talking about. You're talking about something sad or angry, maybe a smile isn't appropriate at all. But for most of the interview, just a nice, calm, pleasant smile goes a long way. It shows that you're approachable, you're someone that they can work with or would enjoy working with, and that you're confident. You're not nervous or sweating or worried about every little thing. You're confident. You're confident enough to smile and to be confident in the interview. So I think a smile can go a long way. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know I'm a big proponent of loud, slow, and clear. When you're in a formal interview or a formal public presentation or anything like that, always speak loud, slow, and clear. Louder than you think is probably the right level, slower than you think is probably right, and clear or as clear as you can speak. When we get nervous or if we're speaking in a foreign language, we tend to speak softer, we tend to speak faster, and then we might start to mumble or make our words less clear, especially if we're speaking in a foreign language. So to counter that, speak loud, slow, and clear. And that also shows your confidence. Don't be in a rush to get through every answer. Take your time, speak slowly, and have confidence. Speak loudly. You don't want them to ask, "What did you say? What was that? Can you speak up?" You want to be loud, slow, and clear. Some other attributes that you want to embrace while you're at the interview: be positive. Even if you're talking about something negative or something bad, of course, you might have to address that. But in general, you want to have a positive disposition. You want to be confident. If you're not confident for almost any type of job, they're probably looking for someone who's confident. There are exceptions to that, but generally, people want to hire somebody that's confident. You also want to be professional. And depending on what the position is, but being a professional might be a minimum standard. If they think, even for a second, that, gee, this person just doesn't strike me as being professional, that's probably the end of the effective interview. Even if they keep asking you questions, they've already decided, yeah, they're really not up to par. They're not really a professional. We better go with somebody else. So you definitely want to appear as a professional. And I would argue to be a professional. Now, what does that mean? Maybe we can do a whole video on that, on being a professional, professionalism, that sort of thing. But it's beyond the scope of this video. But you do want to appear as a professional. That's going to help you in the interview or hurt you if it's missing. Truthful and also authentic. So what I mean by truthful is you don't want to lie about anything at the interview. If they pick up on that lie, they realize that you're lying, either at the interview or maybe later they check something. Oh, wow, they lied about this. Guess what? Your application is over. They're not going to consider you, even if what you lied about was insignificant. The fact that you lied, that's it. They don't want to consider you for anything else. Now, obviously, don't make up stories, don't make up things, don't say you have experiences that you obviously don't have, but also make sure that you can defend whatever you say. If you say, no, I have experience working with that, or I am able to do that, and they imagine someone pushes back, say, well, what experience do you have, or how can you do that? Why would you think that you can do that? Be able to explain why you said that. Now, if you can explain and articulate that, then okay. But if you can't, or in your mind you're like, yeah, I really can't do that, then don't say that you can. Don't say that you have that experience or that expertise. Be truthful. There's lots of stories out there about people that lied at an interview and were caught. And a lot of times they lied about something silly, that they didn't need for this job, but they lied about it, they were caught, and then they were shown the door. The interview effectively over. So be truthful. Also be authentic. And what I mean by that is, with other things I've said, I've encouraged you to kind of put your best foot forward, to be positive, to be confident, to be professional. You know, but also you want to be authentic. So don't pretend to be somebody that you're not. Now, if you're not confident, I'm encouraging you to act confident and become confident. So I don't think that's inauthentic. But sometimes when people apply for an interview, they might kind of take on a persona like, oh, this is the type of person that they want. So they act that way. They act like they're really not. And when the interviewer notices that, they might not know, gee, is this person just being inauthentic, or are they being deceitful? Are they not being truthful? But there's something wrong, something doesn't match here. So they get a negative feeling for it, and it's going to hurt your chances. So you do want to be authentic. Be yourself, but be your best self. Put your best foot forward and try to improve yourself. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't be inauthentic. Before the interview starts, you want to make sure you understand the requirements of this vacancy. What are they looking for? What are the minimum requirements? And maybe what would the ideal candidate be like? And then, how do you fit those requirements? How do you fit into that matrix? Maybe it's very clear that you do, but you want to make sure they understand that you meet these requirements. So you may want to consider it like a list of check boxes, that I have X years of experience. If they're looking for someone with X years of experience, I have X years of experience. They're looking for someone with this qualification, I have this qualification. They're looking for someone with this degree, I have this degree. You want to make sure that all of those boxes are checked so that there's no reason for them not to hire you. Everything they're looking for is right in front of them. You're it. They don't need to look any further. So make sure you understand how you fit the requirements and bring that up. Make sure it's clear. Also, keep in mind your strengths. What are the experiences or the accomplishments that you have that you want to emphasize? You don't want to be thinking about those things in the middle of the interview. You want to have them already in mind before the interview begins. For the requirements for the position as well as your strengths, you want to kind of go back to them during the interview when they bring up questions. Maybe bring up the fact that you've done this, you have this experience, whatever it is. And then that kind of highlights that you are a good fit for this position. You don't need to do it with every question, but you want to take any opportunity to explain your strengths. If there's a question that goes to one of your strengths, make sure you take advantage of that and keep that in mind as you're going through the interview. Let's go through some of the questions that you might hear, or at least the types of questions. The first one, can you tell me about yourself? Now, there's lots of variations to this. Describe yourself, tell me about yourself, tell me about your background, tell me about your academic background, your professional background, tell me about you. Whatever the variation of this is, you want to be ready for it. Now, some interviewers will ask kind of open-ended questions like this. Others will ask very specific questions. And sometimes it might take a few questions to figure out which type of interviewer this interviewer is. But when they ask an open-ended question like this, you want to be ready to take advantage of it. This is the place or the time where you can really sell yourself. So be ready. Explain yourself. What makes you you? You probably want to kind of review your resume, especially the highlights. So you want to identify what big points do you want to make. What are the best parts of your resume that you want to talk about? Obviously, they have the resume in front of them. Maybe they're looking at it as they're talking to you. But you want to highlight the important parts from your resume, from your CV. And as you're doing that, you probably want to go in reverse chronological order. From your most recent, the next most recent, then the next most recent, going back in time. Sometimes if you're more of a recent graduate, they might just ask, okay, what did you do since you graduated? So they want to go forward in time, and that's okay too. But as you get more experience, it's the most recent experience that is probably the most impressive and the most relevant. As you go further back in time, that experience is less and less important. So your older experience, you're probably not going to talk about as much, not as in depth. For example, your most recent job, maybe the job that you're at now, you talk about for a paragraph. But a job that you had 5 jobs ago, maybe you just give a sentence. And also, I was a blank at this company. Maybe that's all you need. If they have questions about it, then you're ready. But that was 10 years ago. You don't need to spend a lot of time on it. But what have you been doing the last couple of years? That's probably much more relevant. So you want to talk about that a little bit more. A lot of interviewers will ask kind of a basic question like, what are your strengths and your weaknesses? Or some variation of that. It's very popular. So you want to be ready with both. Your strengths, we've talked a little bit about it before. You want to identify what is the best part of your CV. What is going to be most impressive for them? Now, generally speaking, it's going to be kind of consistent no matter where you're interviewing, but it might be tailored for different companies. For example, company A might be interested in this part of your background. Company B might be interested in that part of your background. It might be more important for them or for their industry for that position, so you want to take that into account. You want to highlight what's most relevant to this position. And what are your weaknesses? That can be a tricky one. Now, there are plenty of YouTube videos out there that just deal with this one question, so I don't want to get into it too much. We want to be truthful and authentic, but you want to come up with something that is some kind of weakness, but then explain why in reality it's not a weakness or it's a strength. For this one, this is definitely kind of a gotcha question. They're trying to see if you're going to reveal something that you normally wouldn't reveal. Wow, I didn't know that about you. Definitely not going to hire you. And so you don't want to fall into that trap and say something, that is going to force them or encourage them not to hire you. So even if it's kind of a non-answer, it's not the best answer, as long as it doesn't hurt you, you just kind of move on from it, then that's kind of okay. But I encourage you to spend a little bit of time thinking about what possible things you might say for your greatest weakness. So don't think about that for the first time in the interview. They also might ask, why do you want this job? Or what makes you the best candidate for this job? Why should we choose you for this position? Those similar type of questions to those. In here, you want to remember what are the requirements for this position. If you have a personal connection to this company or this type of position, then that's great. You can include that as well. But otherwise, go back to that requirements for this position. As I understand it, you're looking for someone who, boom, 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 and kind of go through those lists. Say that fits me pretty well. This is exactly what I'm looking for. I have these experiences and qualifications, so it looks like I'm a perfect match for this position. Now, if there is a requirement that you don't meet, and you realize it's a weakness, now you kind of have to decide, do you want to hit it head on and bring it up yourself, or wait and see if they bring it up and then respond to it? It kind of depends on what it is, so I can't give specific advice for that. But you do want to be ready to explain why it's not a problem. Or maybe what you have done that is very similar or comparable. Yes, I don't have training in X, but I do have training in Y. And if I can do Y, Y is actually harder than X, so I can definitely figure out X. Since I can do Y, X is not going to be a problem. Something like that explains why, yeah, I don't have this one requirement, or I don't have this experience that the ideal candidate has, but I have something similar, something comparable. And because of that, I'm still a good candidate or a great candidate for this position. Sometimes they may ask about something about the company. What do you know about the company? What do you know about this department? That sort of thing. And that's where the research for the position comes in handy. Hopefully you read about the company, you found out about, this department, this branch, whatever it is, and you can talk about it. And the more that you can explain, the more that you know, is probably going to make you look good. Now, sometimes maybe it's a small company or there's not much information available, so they probably don't expect you to know too much, so don't worry about it. But if there's a lot of information available, this is publicly known, all these things are publicly known, and you're ignorant of them, you have no idea about them, then that's probably not going to make you look great. With Google and LinkedIn, other connections, there's a lot of information out there that is readily available. So try to figure out as much as you can about the company or about the position so you're ready to talk about it. And if you have questions, then that's great too. Another common question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever? And when I interviewed, I often asked this question as well. I thought it was very useful. And one of the things that they may be looking for is, how long are you going to stay in this position? So keep that in mind when you answer it. If your answer is, oh, I'm looking to work here for a couple of years and then get a better job somewhere else, that's not going to make them want to hire you, right? So you want to kind of explain where you are in 5 years or whatever the time period is. So when you talk about your future plans, it should be part of this company, it's in a reasonable part of it. So how is your future going to develop in this company? Now, if it's a large company, maybe that plays well. Gee, I really have a lot of respect for this company. I know they treat their employees very well. So I'm anxious to get started and work in this company and then grow within this company. I know there's lots of opportunities in this company. I want to take advantage of that, do as many trainings and get as much advancement for my career as I can in this company. I look forward to working here for the long term, something like that. And try to be more specific, of course, but try to outline your future with the company. That's obviously going to probably be a better fit than talking about, going somewhere else in a couple of years. Often at the end of the interview, one of the last things the interviewers will ask, you have any questions for us? And it's always great to go into the interview with 3 or 4 or 5 questions ready. Now, sometimes these questions are not questions that I would feel like I definitely need to know the answer to. But if they do ask you for questions, you want to be able to ask a question and show that you've been paying attention, that you've researched, and that you've thought about this position. So you have some questions about it. Now, why do I say to have 3 or 4 or 5? Because I found that sometimes during the interview, they might answer the questions. Gee, I want to know when they want, when this position is going to start. And the first thing they say, we want to hire right away and have someone start as soon as possible. So if at the end of the interview I ask, well, if you hire me, when would I start? They'd probably look at me funny. They've already explained that. So I think it's a good idea to go into the interview with a few questions kind of picked out in advance. And then, some of those might fall away during the interview, as well as you might add some. During the conversation, if it's a good interview, it is a conversation back and forth between the interviewer and the interviewee. And maybe you think of other questions that you hadn't thought about before. You didn't even think about this area before, but during the conversation, you've thought about a question. That's a great question to add. And I'm not saying that you should ask 3 or 4 or 5 questions, but I'm saying ask 1 or 2 questions when the time comes up. And especially if it shows that you've done some research, you've been thinking about this, or you've been paying attention to the conversation, then those can help you make you look a little bit better. Now, if on the other hand, all of your questions were answered, they were very thorough, you don't have any questions, don't feel so bad about it. You might say, gee, I had a couple of questions picked out, but you've already covered them, so I've got nothing to ask. You've been very thorough. That's a fine answer as well. So you do want to be ready to have examples of your work. So think of situations that you were in, accomplishments that you've had, good things, and maybe difficult things as well, challenges that you overcame. Because a lot of times they'll ask questions about that. And it's good if you have several scenarios, several different cases that you can talk about. And you want to identify these and think about these before the interview, because you don't want to be thinking about them for the first time in the interview. Oh, wait a second, there was a time where I had that kind of situation, and that was months ago, years ago. Gee, let me think about what was that situation? How did that work out again? Instead, you want to have it on the top of your mind and ready to discuss. So you want to kind of refresh your memory and think about it. Gee, what was the situation? What happened first? What was the order? How did I handle it? How did it resolve itself? You want to think about those things before. So then when you get asked a question, you can think, oh yeah, that's kind of like my, case 5, and then just start talking about that one. Or no, that's kind of like case 3, and then start talking about that one. And so that kind of gives you an advantage or an edge when talking about it. The next question I want to bring up is what they call behavioral interview questions. So behavioral interview questions, when the interviewer will kind of put you into a situation and then ask how would you respond to that? How would you handle that? And it could be kind of a very general, broad question, where just go, okay, this type of situation, how would you handle it? Or it could be kind of something specific. It could be hypothetical, say you're in this situation, what happens next? Or it could be asking about a real life situation. Tell me about a time where this happened to you. And then, then they want you to give a real life example how you did handle it. So again, having those kind of scenarios, those examples of having those examples of your previous experiences and accomplishments, successes, challenges, ready will help you answer these types of questions. So keep that in mind. One way to answer these types of questions is to use what they call the STAR method. So by answering in this specific order, STAR, it's a mnemonic. So S is the situation. So describe what situation was. T is the task. What was your assignment? What were you supposed to do in this situation? And then A, the action. What did you do? And then R, the result. So at the end of the day, what happened? Did you accomplish what you're supposed to do? Did you solve the problem, or was it not solvable? What was the outcome? And you don't necessarily have to use this method, but I think it's really good to think about it at least, because it gives an organized and logical way to answer these types of questions. And if you use this method, the STAR method, to answer it, you're going to avoid that kind of stream of consciousness. You're just kind of talking about a lot of things as your mind thinks about them. And it's not very effective for the listener. It's not very pleasant for the listener. So the STAR method may be a great way to organize your answer instead of just giving your random thoughts. Another good strategy is to recruit a friend or more than one friend to act as the interviewer. So kind of set up a mock interview in advance. It doesn't have to necessarily be in a conference room, although it's good if you can do it that way. But even if it's in your living room or in the coffee shop or wherever, the more realistic you can make the interview, the better it's going to be. Ask them to ask questions that you anticipate might be asked in the interview. And even if they just Google interview questions, then they're going to find a plethora of interview questions that they could ask. And I encourage you to do the same as well and kind of go through those interview questions. They can ask those interview questions, and you can give the best answers that you can think of at the time. Now, if you have trouble with some of the questions, gee, I didn't like my answer, of course you can ask them to, wait a second, ask me that again, and you can go through it again. But it's good to maybe write down the ones that you have trouble with and then maybe think about the answers a little bit more. Gee, how do I answer that question? What's the best way to answer that? And another thing is to ask them for feedback at the end. Them asking questions and you answering, you're going to get better. But ask them, specifically at the end, you're like, what did you think? What was my strongest answer? What was my weakest answer? What should I concentrate on? What should I focus on, to improve? And they might have an insight. They might have noticed something that you haven't noticed. So that's a good way to do it. And in fact, I'll go one further. In this next video that I'm going to encourage you to watch, I'll do the practice interview with you. So I'll act as the interviewer. I'll go through a bunch of questions as if it's a real interview. I'll pause to give you time to answer. And that's going to be a great way to practice and prepare for your next interview. So watch that interview now, but before you do, let's conquer that like button and make it ours. Remember, work hard today and enjoy tomorrow.